Welcome to another episode of Fight the Burnout. Today we have Mindy coming in from over in Arizona, and she left law enforcement. Well, kind of. She still is in that realm, but left frontline active duty in 2013. And she's going to tell us a little bit about her experience with burnout and how she worked through it, how she continues to work through it, and implemented what the tools is that she has. Uh, Before we get going, as usual, I say just take one thing away from this interview because there's going to be a whole bunch of good ones. There always are. But take one thing away and implement that. Don't try and overcomplicate it. Action is better than inaction to shift and change whatever it is that you're going through. And if you need any help, this episode is always sponsored by Create From Why. So you can go to createfromwhy.com or email me at team@createfromwhy.com. So, Mindy, welcome and thanks for being here. Thanks for coming on. I know you got a very busy life and it's very hot and humid, as you were saying, over there in Arizona at the moment. So, tell us a little bit about yourself and your background with law enforcement, why you got into it, and kind of the different roles that you played while you were in it.
Okay. So let's see. I got into it straight out of college, back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's kind of funny. The reason I actually got into it was I went to school for psychology and quickly realized when I got out that my degree was not going to yield me much in the sense of pay or experience right off the bat. And I in my previous years had been a figure skater, and I was really good with the families there. And one of the families there, he was the commander for the employment bureau at Phoenix PD, and they were recruiting. That was back at a time when they were losing a lot of people, and they were recruiting. And he came at me, and it was funny because it wasn't a job I ever would have anticipated that I would have thought about, but once he talked to me about it and encouraged me, I tried it. I was a pretrial services officer at the time, working at the jail. And I ended up loving it, and felt like it was a good way for me to utilize my degree and build my skills while being able to make a good living. So, and help other people. So it was kind of a culmination of all that.
Awesome, awesome. No, that's cool. So straight out, obviously, you went in at that time when they hired you. Did they send you to academy, or did you have to put yourself through academy?
No, they sent me through the academy.
They sent you through academy, so you did academy, and then I take it came out FTO, like did FT, field training, um,
Yes.
and then patrol. How long were you on patrol for?
I was on patrol for 6.5 years.
6.5 years. Okay,
Mhm.
fun times. So patrol six
Yes.
and a half years. What's patrol like over in Phoenix, or back then?
Well, I moved, actually, I changed departments during FTO. I moved from Phoenix over to Glendale PD. So I was with Glendale for the rest of my career. But yeah, patrol on the streets here. I worked the South Side swing shift.
Yeah.
Um, and I did that for the majority of my career. I'm the type of person I like to be busy, and I was very busy. I got what I wanted. And yeah, it was busy and it was fun. And I felt like I had a purpose, but it was tough. I saw a lot of stuff. I dealt
Yeah.
with a lot of stuff. I was lucky because I worked very closely with the people around me, with my fellow officers, and we all had a really tight bond. And so that really got us through a lot.
How'd you find with bringing, because I know like now, I know you left in 2013, but you're still involved with departments and that. I know you left in 2013. How do you file, and now they're talking a lot about this, the mental health stuff and having counselors that go in instead of cops, and cops going, oh, I'm not a counselor, all this, but you had a psychology degree. How do you feel that that actually helped you as a cop?
Oh, well, I had a psychology degree, but I didn't have a lot of experience
Yeah.
going into it. It was interesting because it gave me a unique perspective, the stuff that I learned when I was going through school. I believe that it did. And the one thing that I did was I was approached early on they were trying to start up our department's peer support group.
Yep.
And I was approached early on about that. And I was really interested in that side of it. So I got involved in that very early on in my career.
Yep.
And I was always involved in that through my whole career. So I did patrol for 6 years. I did a unit where we focused on neighborhood problems for a year. I did a lot of nickel and dime dope houses and stuff like that, search warrants. And then I was a vehicular crimes detective for the rest of my career when I left. That's where I was at. Um,
Okay.
yeah. So
Fun. Which one is your favorite?
of all those three,
Yeah.
I would have to say patrol. I missed it. I was an FTO. I did gangs a little bit when I was. It was fun. It was a lot of fun on the streets back then.
Why do you feel it was so much fun? Like what was the excitement side of it?
Well, really, it was an excitement for me. It was just I'm the type of person. I'm a people person. I like to be around people. I like to be busy. I was busy. I was active. It was like because I would always find stuff to do. Like if I would find something if I couldn't if there wasn't a call, which was rare on swing shift, but if it happened, or I was always going up north to help out, or I was always doing something because just me as a person in general. But it was I don't even know if it was really exciting as much as it was just fun. Like we were able to talk to a lot of different people. We were able to meet a lot of different people. I really enjoy. I'm a problem solver, so I really enjoy like getting things thrown at me that I don't know what to do with and trying to figure out what to do with them. And it just kept me busy and active, and I liked it.
So from patrol, where'd you go? You went to neighborhood.
It was called Neighborhood Response Squad. We did anything that was a neighborhood problem. So sometimes we do like if there was a burglar, if we had high burglaries in an area, we would do surveillance and try and resolve that issue. We did a lot of community stuff with like the block watch groups and sometimes it was a lot of nickel and dime dope houses, though the smaller deal, the smaller
Yeah.
houses that were and we'd help out the bigger level crimes too. On occasion we'd go help them when they needed help, or when other jurisdictions like the feds or people were in our area, we would go help out with search warrants on that and whatnot. But that was fun. I learned a lot about search warrants. I became the search warrant queen there. I wrote a lot of warrants.
You got to be good to write good warrants.
I did. I got good at that. It
Yeah,
just
yeah,
served me well now.
yeah, yeah. No, I bet. All right. So what was the catalyst for you to move from patrol to neighborhood?
It was actually my goal, was what I wanted to do. I
Oh,
always
okay.
wanted to do.
Uh-huh.
And then I got there and it wasn't all I thought it was cracked up to be.
It's funny how that happens, isn't it? Like I know I had that experience as well. I was like, oh yeah, I'm gonna go to diplomatic protection, and I did like our version of Secret Service for the last 3.5 years of my career. I was like, I'm gonna go there because it's gonna be exciting and fun. And I got there, and I was like, this is actually a whole lot of hurry up and wait and do nothing.
Yeah. I had a lot that I faced on that year on that squad.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so yeah, it was not my cup of tea. So
Not okay. So obviously, it wasn't your cup of tea, and then you went to vehicular crime. Was it?
yes, I went to
Yeah.
vehicular crime. So I did traffic accidents like fatals and serious injury wrecks for 7 years almost.
Yeah, gotcha. So it was all like serious crash type stuff.
Hmm.
Yeah, so I've got a friend of mine who I've known him longer than I was in the police, and he's still on it. So he is going on. I think he's been on it going on almost 15 years. He's doing that.
Wow.
Did you enjoy it?
I did. Yes, I did.
What
It
was your
was
favorite
hard
part?
though. My favorite part were I loved going on call outs. That was
Mm,
always fun, even though they were long and exhausting and sometimes more than one in a night. But it was, I liked being out. Again, I like being active. It's like you get on a wreck and it was like a big puzzle that needed to be solved. It was like there was evidence everywhere. You just had to put it all together.
yeah, yeah.
I really enjoyed that. That was something I like to do.
So okay, cool. So we've got a bit of a picture, the different things. You did patrol for 6.5 years. Did neighborhood for take it. It sounded like about a year, ish,
Hmm.
and then you
Hmm.
did vehicular crime. Sorry, for how long?
Oh, it was somewhere between, I think it was like 6, 7 years, maybe at the most.
Oh, okay, cool. And then I know you moved on, did some other things, but there's a lot of trauma in there, I take it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. What was the hardest part of all of that? What would you, if you pinned it down, what was the hardest parts of, well, for each one, what was the hardest part of patrol, neighborhood, and then vehicular, crime? What would you say the hardest things were?
Oh, um, the hardest for me, honestly, when I look back at all the trauma that I dealt with, it was not really in the trauma itself, as in other people's responses to the trauma. The that I was having, or in my actions, or that was where I struggled a lot. Like, there was one, incident where it was a child who was shot point blank with a shotgun in the back of the head. And I was the first responder, and one of my best friends was my backup. And we had cleared the apartment, saw the child. She had dealt with the child before, and I knew that. So I told her to leave, and I'd stayed with the child and let her go deal with mom and the situation outside. And I quickly realized that he was gone and there was nothing I could do. There's nothing. Like, he was missing part of his head. There was nothing I could do.
Yeah.
And I was starting to feel for a pulse, and another officer came in, and he checked, and he just looked at me and shook his head and walked out. And I said, okay, yeah, I know. Now I know. Yeah. And then 2 seconds later, fire came in, and the fireman looked up at me. He was like, why aren't you doing CPR? What are you doing? And I'm like, I'm looking at him like, oh. And when we did our debriefing and our diffusing afterwards, he said what caused him the most trauma was that I was doing nothing. And I really struggled with that. And that was where I struggled. Like, I worked through that incident that night. I took myself down. I went home. I called my mom. My mom came over. She stayed with me. I had some nightmares I dealt with. I had some things I worked through because I was living alone at the time. She came, she stayed with me. We talked it through for several days. I worked through, I felt like I did a really good job of working through it, but that's what really got to me. And it wasn't, I just, it kept at me. And I finally realized that where my trauma wasn't in the incident. It was in what he said and how he felt. And I thought, it took me a while to come to terms with the fact that I had to understand that that was his own trauma response. And I can't fault him for that either, because people, when they're in the middle of a trauma experience, anything can happen, and that's okay. Like, you have to be okay with that, and you have to understand that that's what it is, and you have to try and work around it. So it wasn't until I kind of got a greater understanding myself.
How long after that incident did you actually get that understanding?
It wasn't, it came through me helping other officers a lot.
Yeah.
And doing peer support and doing debriefings and diffusings, and sitting with them in the middle of horrible incidents and dealing with their trauma and helping them process that. I came to terms with that. It was about probably 3 or 4 years later that I realized that it was time to let that go, because it wasn't mine, and it was totally okay what he did.
No, yeah, it's so interesting. Like, emotion has everything, somebody else's emotion can cause us to then have an emotional response, and that locks so much stuff in. And I had a similar incident where I blame myself for something that an offender did to my partner. He punched her and then trying to evade arrest, and I held it to heart for a good 6-7 years, even after I left, and until again I released it and I realized, hey, I did everything that I could because with the skills that I had. And it takes that. So if an officer is listening right now and they're like, oh yeah, that actually kind of resonates with me, what would you recommend for them?
Well, you got to be willing to be vulnerable. That's a hard thing. You've got to trust, to be able to be vulnerable. And so, I just recommend them trusting the process, because it's really, it's hard and it's messy, and it's not going to look, it's unknown. You're not going to be able to say what it's going to look like. Yeah. But you have to trust that if you walk through it and you just take the next best step, you're going to come out the right way. It's going to come out eventually how it needs to be, which is the right way, which will make you more healthier and stronger.
Oh, I love that. And it is so true. Mindy, what would you say your definition of burnout is?
Well, for me, I think it's different for some people, but some things are the same, but I think it looks different. Like, for me, it was trying to balance things, and I couldn't balance anymore. Like, I was to a point that I had all the balls in the air and I couldn't do it anymore. They were falling, and I needed to realize why they were falling. And then I needed to turn that around to a better direction. But for me, it looked like physically, it looked like the big thing for me was my loss of memory. I have a lot of loss of memory. Like I don't remember a lot of stuff from high school. And it scares me because my mom has Alzheimer's. I'm dealing with that right now. I'm her power of attorney and I'm like thinking, and for the longest time I thought, oh no, is this hitting me? And it's hitting me early. And I'm like, and then I did research and I realized, no, it's all the stupid crap that's happened to me that I've had to deal with. And it's like my brain was on overload so much trying to think about everything I got to do for work and everything I got to do for home and everything I got to do that I'm just taking information in instead of letting it resonate. I'm pushing it right back out so I can get more information in. And so I finally had to come to terms with the fact that I can't do that anymore. Like if I want to have memories and I want to have any kind of a life, I can't do that anymore. Like I've got to figure out where that balance is.
So like I got goosebumps there because that was exactly what I felt. I thought my grandmother had dementia before she passed away, and I sat there and I was like, I'm getting dementia. Or I also researched and it was like, oh, a side effect of diabetes. So I went and got a blood test, and they're like, no, you're totally like, without even talking to my wife about any of it. I still can't remember half the stuff. I'm constantly having to drag memories out of even just my policing career. It's interesting. I've done a lot of research and even just reading the definition, like Webster definition of burnout versus PTSD, and they're very similar. Uh, what are your beliefs on the cause of trauma causing, trauma causing burnout?
Well, I definitely think it can, because I mean, it can be overwhelming
Mm,
depending on how severe your symptoms are, your triggers are, I mean, if you have a trigger that's something that is in daily life, that's hard to deal with, and you're looking at a daily response, trauma response, so I definitely think it can, but I also think it just depends. I think it depends on the degree.
mm, mm.
And it's
Yeah.
different for everybody. And
Uh,
and I don't do I think that I ever I don't feel like I've ever had PTSD in the sense of actual PTSD.
mm.
But I've definitely had burnout, and I think traumatic stress has definitely lent itself to that to an extent, for sure.
Was there a specific incident or specific time where you're like, wow, okay, like you recognize the memory loss, or you started to go, hey, actually, something needs to change, something needs to happen when it came to when you were in the depths of, the burnout? Because I know like everybody, everybody has different levels of burnout. Consistently happens. That's how we grow and we develop and we push through things. We decide we want to shift and change and alter course. But when like you said, the memory loss was real. You thought you might have Alzheimer's. You had all these different things kind of going on that you got to. Was there a specific incident or incidents that you were like, hey, something's going on. I need to make a shift.
Yeah, so it didn't come when I was in law enforcement. After law enforcement, I went on to work for the Department of Child Safety for 8 years, and I did all of their high level. I did their criminal investigations. I worked on a team that's all we did was fatalities, serious abuse cases, and I was a manager at the time. I had a team of 6 investigators, and it was after COVID, just after COVID, about a year after COVID hit, not even a full year. And I was on call. I was, my phone would ring. Like that's the thing with child safety that people don't seem to, if if a child is unsafe at 3:30 in the afternoon on your caseload, guess who's going out at 4 o'clock in the afternoon unexpectedly, which is almost every single night. Especially as a manager, I didn't have to go out in the field. I was lucky. See, I justified it to myself thinking, oh, I'm a manager, so I don't have to go out in the field anymore. So it'll be good for my kids because I'll be able to be home. Well, it was even worse for my kids because guess what? I was home. I was physically home, but I was not mentally here.
Mm.
And I would come home at night at 5 or 6, and I would all day long, I'd be telling my kids, no, mommy's working. It's mommy's work time. It's mommy's work time. Well, then guess what? 5 or 6 o'clock would happen. And every single night I'd be on the phone, sometimes till 2 in the morning, or, various calls on cases. And my kids were like, after 5, mommy, like, and that was just a repetitive pattern. Like, and I got to the point, like, I'm trying to remember what she said, but my daughter, I'll never forget, and I was trying to hide them when I would have to staff. I'd have to go into a different room of my house, find a place to be far away from, because when they were getting older, they were understanding more. And of course, the stuff I was talking about, they couldn't hear. And my daughter said something, and I don't even remember what it was now, but she said something that only would have come from overhearing a conversation that I was on the phone about. And I just was like, it was like something slapped me in the face. And I'm like, she's 10 years old, and I'm not here for her. And she's, I've done a pretty good job, at least I feel like, working my tail off as a single mom to keep her sheltered and keep her innocence. And then here I am destroying inadvertently with my job. And that just, I started seeing some signs of depression in my kids. I noticed changes in their activity and that was the wall for me. That was, I was like, I quit without having another job to go to. I was like, I can't do this anymore. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'll figure it out, and that's what I ended up doing.
Yeah, it's interesting as law enforcement. I'd love to have your input or your thoughts on it. As law enforcement, or people that join law enforcement and do it for a good amount of time, um, and also sadly get to the states where we did, where you get burned out, where you're like, okay, I've got to just literally cut all this out. Um, it takes somebody else's pain, or somebody else that's seeing something in somebody else that we're like, I caused that. No, this is not good. I caused that. Because we're protectors. At the end of the day, that's what we want. That's what we joined so we could protect. And yeah, so I'm glad that you recognized it. It sucks that you had to, but I'm sure you learned a lot going through it all. What would be, if you could go back in time? I don't know, that's a kind of, we don't want to change our past because then we wouldn't be where we are right now. But if you could go back in time and teach your younger self, or in turn, obviously, teach somebody who's coming up behind you, but teach your younger self one thing so that you could maybe work through that easier, or just tell yourself that it's okay, what would it be that you would tell yourself or teach yourself?
Hmm. Um, it's interesting to me. And looking back at all of this, when most cops are risk takers. You're risk takers. You're not afraid at all to play with people's lives or your life on the street, on a daily basis. That's what you do. But for some reason, when it comes to going out of our comfort zone in our career or in other areas of our life, we are so not risk takers, and we are so scared. I am the epitome of that. That is, I always joke, because I have a deep belief in God, and I'm a Christian, and a part of that feeds into, I always joke with people, because God's literally got to kick me in the ass to get me to move. Like literally, like slap me in the face, kick me in the ass, Mindy, because I will just stick with something until it kills me or somebody else.
Yeah.
When it comes to my career or my commitment, when I make a commitment to something. And I think what you have to understand is boundaries have to come into play with that. Boundaries are so important, and you can't have such strong commitment without boundaries. Like, that's where you have to know that the boundaries are what guide you, and when it's time to leave. And I've always said this, it's like when, as officers, we're trained and we go in and we know that, I always tell women, because they always ask me about self-defense, and I always tell them, you have to go, it's all in the mind. It's not in the body, it's in the mind. So you have to go in where your decision point is going to happen months before, years before. It's not going to happen in the moment. So you have to train yourself to think, if this happens, what am I going to do? And then that's what you'll do. So you have to do that. And it's the same with this. You have to train yourself that here are my boundaries. Here's where I'm not willing to go. You have to think about that up front early on. And then you have to stick to that, and you have to give yourself permission to stick to that, and it's okay. And then you have to educate others around you, like your family, and this is, I'm going to go into this career, and this is what I'm going to do, but this is where my limitations are, and this is, if I ever get to this point, or if I do that, or this is what I'm not willing to give up in my personal life, or in who I am, or or in our family.
I
And you have
love
to give
that.
other people permission to hold you accountable too, which is not always
Yeah, that's not easy, especially as law enforcement. We think of ourselves as the alpha, the omega, all of
Yep.
it.
Type
Oh,
A's. Yep.
yeah, but we're not. I know. I wanted to ask you. I'm a huge why and purpose driven person. I believe everybody has a underlying planted purpose and why from when they were a child. And being on youth, you probably will have seen a little bit of this as well. And you can change the rules around it and how it applies to your life. But I believe that there's a statement. Mine is I help people. I want to be seen. And so my thing is now is I use that instead of me always going, hey, look at me, look at me. I use that to go, okay, how do I help somebody else be seen or see themselves? How do I help myself see myself? What would you say your why or purpose is, Mindy, that's caused, that through your entire life has been that driver and everything that you've done and you still do today?
It's helping people to understand that you're so much more than what happens to you.
Hmm.
What happens to you is not your fault. It's not your burden. It becomes your burden because you take it on, and that's okay, but it's not you, and there's so much more to you, and you need to find that. Like you need to, and that's what I do in every job, giving victims a voice. Like I did crisis counseling and victim advocacy for 2 years, and then I before I went into child welfare, and now I'm working defense work, and I'm doing a lot of rehabilitation with juveniles, and it's I'm helping people to understand that one thing that happens to you is not you as a whole person,
Hmm.
and where to stay focused, where to have a mindset, where to stay focused, where to that, if I can do that for one person, two people in my lifetime, then I've been successful. I feel like I have, and I've fulfilled my purpose and my why. And so that's where it lies for me.
Oh, I love that. How do you apply it to yourself?
Um, I forced myself to make time for myself. I did some therapy. And when I was going through a divorce and some other things, and she pointed out to me that I am such a service person that I do not do for myself, and that in making time for myself, I'm actually putting others first. So I adopted that several years ago, and I make sure I know what it is for me. I've found my things that help me to relieve stress, help me to feel like a whole person, and I've educated my kids around why that time is important for me, and I encourage them to do the same thing, even though they're small and young, and there are certain things that they do that we make a priority because it's their thing, and so I'm trying to raise them up that way, and I think that that's what's really important.
I love that. I love that. Speaking of boundaries, I know you have to run soon to take your daughter to a party. So I'm gonna wrap up here, but I love everything that you've said. It is so important. Boundaries, looking after yourself, educating other people in what you need as well. And then also I take it you also are open to what they need and knowing what their boundaries in that are so that we can be more in tune with ourselves and then we can actually turn up to those that we serve even better. Last question I always like to ask, Mindy, is what is your top tip to self happiness?
Top tip to self happiness. Oh, that's easy. I always tell people this: you are not responsible for anybody else's happiness, and they are not responsible for yours. You have to find what makes you happy. You have to spend the time and energy in doing that, and you alone are responsible for that in making that happen.
Nah, I love that, Mindy. I love that. Only take responsibility for yourself, not other people's happiness. That's amazing comment that I think people need to actually understand more, especially law enforcement and first responders. Mindy, any last words before we wrap up?
No, I think I'm out of words. Shockingly.
I love it. I love it. Well, this is Fight the Burnout, and I want to thank you, Mindy, for being here, for taking the time and out of your busy day, out of your life, to help those that are in service, that are out of service, that are wanting to get into the service, or even just people that are just listening. because there's a lot of wise words in here. If you didn't catch one, go back and have another listen, but also share this around. Think of one person that you know, because if you share this around, then it compounds. They'll share it around. And then it just keeps going, and it becomes a movement. Everybody starts to shift and change and grow and develop. And if you are needing assistance at all of any kind, if you're like, hey, something resonated in here, you want to find out more, you want to learn more about it, send me an email, team@createfromwhy.com, or you can go to createfromwhy.com and book a time to specifically have a conversation with me. But till next time, Mindy, thank you. Everybody, thank you very much. And remember, stay safe out there, and look after yourself so then you can look after everybody else.
Amen. Thank you, Chris.